This is the story of how the greatest empire in history fell, not in a single day, but over centuries of greed, decay, and betrayal. The Roman Empire reached its height under Emperor century AD. Its borders stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the sands of Mesopotamia. Over 70 million people lived under the Roman banner, an empire of roads, aqueducts, and order. But even at its peak, signs of weakness were beginning to show. The cost of maintaining such vast lands was immense. Armies needed to be paid, borders defended, and revolts crushed. The empire's wealth, once flowing freely from conquest, began to slow as expansion stopped. Inside the walls of Rome, politics became poisonous. Senators conspired, generals betrayed, and emperors rose and fell with terrifying speed. Power became the ultimate prize, and men were willing to kill for it. When Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, took the throne in 180 AD, many believed the empire's soul began to die. He saw himself as a god, dressed as a gladiator, and ignored the crumbling foundations of his empire. When he was assassinated, Rome plunged into chaos. The 3rd century brought what historians call the crisis of the empire. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors came and went. Most of them murdered by their own soldiers. Civil wars drained the treasury, plague decimated the population, and barbarian invasions tore through the weakened frontiers. The once mighty Roman legions, disciplined and loyal, became mercenaries fighting for whoever paid them the most. Out of this chaos rose a new leader, Diocletian. He realized the empire had grown too large to govern as one. His solution was radical, divided in two. The Eastern Empire, ruled from Byzantium, and the Western Empire, ruled from Rome. For a time, his system worked. The East grew richer, safer, and more stable. But the West began to rot. Corruption ran deep. The once proud Roman citizenry had grown lazy, dependent on free grain and entertainment, bread and circuses. The poet Juvenal called it, "Give the people food and games, and they will forget their freedom." The Senate, once the heart of Roman democracy, became a puppet. The emperors grew paranoid, isolated in their palaces, surrounded by luxury while famine and poverty spread through the streets. The 4th century brought a new kind of change, religious transformation. Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and moved the capital to a new city, Constantinople. To many Romans, this was a betrayal of the old gods who had built their empire. Pagan temples closed, old traditions faded, and a cultural divide widened between East and West. While Constantinople thrived as a Christian metropolis, Rome itself began to lose not only its political power but its spiritual identity. And outside the borders, the world was shifting. Entire tribes, Goths, Vandals, Huns, were on the move. Driven by hunger, war, and fear of the unstoppable Huns from the east, they flooded into Roman lands. At first, Rome allowed them in as refugees. But mistreatment and greed turned them into enemies. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman army faced the Gothic tribes. The result was a disaster. The Emperor Valens was killed, and his army annihilated. For the first time, the Romans realized their legions were not invincible. By the 5th century, Rome was a shadow of its former glory. Emperors were made and unmade by barbarian generals. The treasury was empty, the roads unsafe, and once loyal provinces were breaking away. In 410 AD, something unthinkable happened. The city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under their king Alaric. For 800 years, Rome had stood untouched. When its gates fell, the world trembled. People said it was the end of the world, the wrath of God upon a corrupt empire. The West staggered on for another half-century. Puppet emperors ruled under the control of barbarian generals. The empire was Roman in name only, its armies filled with foreign soldiers, its culture diluted, its purpose lost. The Eastern Empire, now the Byzantine Empire, watched but did not intervene. Constantinople had become the new heart of the Roman world. Rome itself was left to decay. In 476 AD, the end came quietly. A Germanic general named Odoacer deposed the last emperor, a boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, the Little Augustus. No grand battle, no final defense. The Western Roman Empire simply ceased to exist. The Roman Senate sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople, symbolically surrendering what remained of their authority. The Eternal City had fallen. But the fall of Rome was not just a political collapse. It was the unraveling of an entire way of life. Art, literature, engineering, law, centuries of progress faded into what would later be called the Dark Ages. Roads crumbled, aqueducts dried up, libraries burned. The great Roman bathhouses, once filled with citizens discussing philosophy, became ruins filled with silence. So when we speak of the fall of Rome, we're not just talking about a city or an empire. We're talking about us humanity's greatest triumph and greatest warning. For history is a mirror, and in the reflection of Rome's ruins, we see our own potential for greatness and our own path to destruction. Empires rise, empires fall. But the story of Rome, the glory, the corruption, the resilience remains eternal, and as long as we remember its rise and its fall, perhaps we can avoid repeating its fate.